Good morning and good afternoon to everybody on our line here today. We really appreciate you taking out the time. My name is Eric Ranta. I look after partners here at Limeade. And what we're going to talk today is some interesting work that Limeade and Optisum are doing together for the betterment of our customers. Most importantly, what we're really trying to do is bring hearts and minds to work. And in doing so, one of the most important aspects of that is we want to make sure that people are the best selves that they can possibly be. And a critical component to that is sleep. And I'm really delighted that we've got Dr. Manafo here with us today, who's going to present a really engaging dialogue here. So let's go ahead and get started.
Eric, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Dominic.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just put up my screen here. All right, can everybody see that screen? Oh, here we go. Now I have the ability to share it. And that should work. Excellent. All right. Eric, thank you very much. A big thank you to Molly and also to Lindsay and all the team at Limeade. It really is a pleasure to be with you today. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And I hope that at the end of the webinar today, you'll see why sleep deprivation in the workplace really is such an important topic for us to address. So let's get a little perspective on why this is such an issue. If we look back at the data, we know that back in the 1960s, most of us were getting about 8 hours of sleep. And that's good because the data also suggests that humans as a species need about 8.2 hours of sleep to be adequately restored. But over the subsequent 50 years or so, that number has continued to decline. So if you look at data from the early part of the 2000s, we were getting about 7 hours of sleep. And the most recent data suggests that about 30% of us are getting 6 or less hours, and 40% are getting less than 7 hours of sleep per night. So it's not hard to see how this has in fact become a public health epidemic in the terms of the Centers for Disease Control. Now, lest we think this is a US-centric problem, we are the sole sleep solution provider to Compass Group. Compass Group is the world's largest provider of food services. And as their partner, they shared with us data from 9 European countries that covered about 7,000 to 8,000 employees as part of their Eat at Work survey. And what they found across Europe was that the rates of sleep deprivation were very similar. Here you see the percentages of individuals that were getting less than 7 hours of sleep per night. So we've established that this is a prevalent problem. What I'd like to talk to you now about is why it's a problem. And I'd like to approach that by talking about some of the most important functions of sleep. So here we have cleansing, consolidation, and restoration. Now, as far as the cleansing function goes, we've learned over the last 10 or so years that the brain has its own drainage system called the glymphatics. The flow through the glymphatics doubles at night when you're in slow wave sleep. During the course of the day, your brain is metabolically active, and all those metabolic byproducts need to be cleaned away during the course of the evening. We also know that beta amyloid and tau proteins can accumulate in the brain, and when they do, they can produce neurofibrillary tangles, which are associated with cognitive impairment and dementia. So if you compromise the amount of time that an individual has to sleep and cleanse their brain, it's not hard to see how that could have very dire consequences. Now, the consolidation feature is also very important. During the day, once again, you're bombarded by information. You need to be able to convert the important short-term information into long-term memories. So if you think about this as the tree of knowledge inside of your brain, and the leaves are all those various pieces of information you need to be able to recall, just like you need to lace a tree and cut the dead wood, you similarly need to be able to prune out the information in the brain that's not being used, is not relevant, and produce strong pathways to those pieces of information that are most important to you. So consolidation at night is the ability to take those short-term memories and really make a strong pathway so they become a long-term association. The last one is the restorative aspects of sleep. Now, I'm currently battling a broken shoulder, and so I'm in the midst of needing my sleep and trying to get sleep in order to try and rehab that shoulder. But it's more than just the bone and the soft tissues that are important. It's also the immune system. And I'll show you some data in a little while that shows that if you shortchange the sleep of an individual, you can actually compromise their immune system and make them more susceptible to disease. Now, what I'd like to do as we go through is to ask a couple of rhetorical questions of you just to get you thinking a little bit about some of the issues that we're going to discuss. So the first one is a true or false. Humans can function just fine on 4 to 6 hours of sleep. Now, I have to say that up until the turn of the century, and by that I mean, let's say the 80s and the 90s, when I was training in medical school, we really did feel, and I was taught, that it was a good idea for the people that were training to be chronically sleep deprived, because the data suggested that by being chronically sleep deprived, you would become better at functioning when you were sleep deprived, and therefore when you were in practice, you would be able to function at a higher level. And I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience in their various professions have experienced similar things and have been told that it was good to train with this level of sleep deprivation. Well, what we've learned in the early part of the 2000s is that there's a problem with that. And here I'd like to take you through a study that was done at the University of Pennsylvania by Dr. Alan Pack and his associates. This is about 2003. And here you see on the y-axis the sleepiness score. So this is how sleepy an individual says they feel. And then along the x-axis are days out to 14 days, 2 weeks. The first line that you see are individuals that are completely sleep deprived for 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. And you can see their level of sleepiness increases dramatically and linearly. But then there were 2 groups of individuals that were partially sleep deprived to either 4 hours or 6 hours. And what's very fascinating is that if you look at these individuals, initially they became very sleepy as well. But what happened at day 3 to day 14? Well, their sleepiness levels tended to plateau. And when the researchers talked to them at day 10 or day 12, these individuals had the feeling that they had adapted to their sleep deprivation, they had it under control, and that their level of performance was unimpaired. Now, this is the sort of the state of affairs when, again, at the turn of the century, when we were making recommendations about training, and this was the data that people were using. But these researchers said, wait a minute, technology has progressed to a point where now we can have objective measures of function. And so now what you see on the y-axis is an objective measure of function known as performance lapses or psychomotor vigilance. This is replaced now the subjective sense of sleepiness. Again, on the x-axis, we have time out to 2 weeks. Once again, those individuals on the left who were completely sleep deprived for 1, 2, and 3 days showed that their performance dramatically diminished over time. But what's very important to see here is that those that were partially sleep deprived for either 4 hours or 6 hours, their performance declined as well. It did not plateau. So despite the fact that they felt that they had adapted to sleep deprivation, the fact is they had not. And over this entire course of this study, over the full 2 weeks, these individuals' performance continued to decline in a linear fashion. So this really put the lie to the idea that somehow the amount of sleep that you need will decrease over time and that you could train out the need for sleep. So I hope that we've talked a little bit now about the importance of this problem and the prevalence. Now let's talk a little bit about the impact that it's having on our society. The data would suggest that anywhere from $16 billion all the way to $63 billion are spent by corporate America on health, safety, and productivity consequences of poor quality and quantities of sleep. And in fact, in the last couple of years, there was a RAND report that suggested that the productivity cost may be as high as $400 billion. So some really dramatic impacts with regard to poor sleep. So let's move on now to another question for you. Sleep does not affect my overall physical health. So here we've talked about sleepiness, we've talked a little bit about performance, but maybe my health is unaffected. Even though I'm sleepy, my health is still okay. Well, I want to prove that this one is certainly not the case. So let's look at some data here. You can see on the left dramatic increases in the rates of obesity in people who were chronically sleep deprived. The middle statistic at 1.45, these are chronic insomniacs that have increased cardiovascular risk. And on the right-hand side, again, chronic sleep deprivation leading to an increased chance of developing diabetes. So if we dive into this health consequences a little bit more deeply, here is data out of the Mayo Clinic. A lab run by Varen Summers took individuals into the hospital. They sleep deprived one group, and then the other group was allowed to sleep their normal amounts. And sure enough, those individuals that were sleep deprived to 2/3 of their normal amount of sleep consumed 559 additional calories per day during their period of sleep deprivation. Now, these are excess calories. These were not needed for metabolic demands. So it's not hard to see how consuming that many calories on a daily basis could certainly lead to issues with regard to obesity and diabetes. But let's go even further. Here is some work out of the University of Chicago. And I would ask you another rhetorical question. What would you say if I told you that I could take a group of healthy millennials and without changing their diet or their medications in the span of only 6 days, I could convert their blood chemistries to those of a pre-diabetic? I think we'd all be pretty shocked by that. Well, that's exactly what these researchers did. You can see here, these were healthy millennials that were sleep restricted to 4 hours per night for 6 nights. What they showed was decreased glucose tolerance and decreased insulin secretion, again, pre-diabetic types of indications, and increased cortisol concentrations. Cortisol is the stress hormone. And then the increased sympathetic nervous system activity, again, goes with this high level of stress. So I think you can see very clearly that sleep deprivation certainly has a dramatic impact on our health. True and false. Sleep impacts my employees' safety at work. Well, I think you're getting probably the picture as we go. That's a big yes. So we know that the data suggests that about 20% of all serious car crash injuries are related to drowsy drivers. You're 70% more likely to be involved in a workplace accident when you're sleep deprived. And when you are in fact sleep deprived, your level of impairment can be that impaired as to be consistent with a level of legal intoxication. So here are some data. If you look at the top line here, 24 hours without sleep, that's an acute sleep debt of 8 hours. When they did actual performance testing on these individuals, they had a performance that was equivalent to a blood alcohol content of 0.08. Now, I know a lot of us don't do all-nighters anymore, but let's say you're a soccer mom or a soccer dad. And so on the bottom line, let's say you only got 6 hours per night for a period of 10 or 12 nights. Well, guess what? Your level of performance could be similarly impaired. And then on the middle line, let's say you have an important project at work and you're really working hard in that last week to get it done. You're compromising your sleep to 4 to 5 hours per night. You can be similarly impaired. So again, dramatic impacts on safety. High-profile accidents like the Exxon Valdez, 3 Mile Island, and the Space Shuttle Challenger all had significant components of sleep deprivation in those tragedies. This is the America Insomnia Survey conducted out of Harvard. They estimated that on the order of 274,000 accidents were insomnia related in the workplace, and that's insomnia alone. The average cost of those accidents was on the order of $32,000 for a whopping $31 billion with regard to the cost of these workplace accidents. True or false? Sleep does not affect my overall performance. Well, I think as we go through these slides, you can see how could it not, given the dramatic impact that it's having on health and safety, how is it that it could not impact on our overall performance? So let's look at some data here. You can see on the left, if you are having problems with chronic insomnia, you may be as much as twice as likely to miss work. The statistic in the center gets to the restorative functions of sleep as well. So as I mentioned, the immune system is very importantly restored at night while we're sleeping. This study showed that when they took 2 groups of individuals, they sleep deprived one, and then they exposed both of them to a virus in their nasal passages. Those that were sleep deprived were 3 times more likely to go on to develop a clinical cold, an infection. So again, really supporting the idea that sleep is important for the restorative function with regard to the immune system. We also know that chronic insomnia dramatically increases the likelihood of depression, as well as anxiety and panic disorder. If you're trying to work on the mental health of any group of individuals, any population, sleep is so important. There's literature now that says that when you're dealing with depression, if there is concomitant insomnia, you really must deal with the insomnia at least concomitantly with any kind of antidepressant therapy. And there's even a suggestion that dealing with sleep in and of itself may have a very beneficial effect and may actually really have a dramatic impact on the depression alone. So the use of sleep and the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy that we'll talk about is vital when you're dealing with mental health issues. Now let's go back to that COMPASS data that I showed you earlier. As part of their Eating at Work report, they also looked at individuals who reported that they had poor quality sleep either most of the time or all of the time. And as you would expect, those people had a significantly higher chance of being grumpy, having poor performance or concentration, and having an increased appetite while they were at work. So all of these statistics and all of this data certainly supports the impact on productivity in the workforce. If we go back to Kessler's work, again, this is out of Harvard, the American Insomnia Survey. They looked at 8,000 working individuals, and they found a prevalence of chronic insomnia nearly 22%. The lost productivity per individual, over $2,200, and a staggering 253 million days of lost productivity. So again, very, very dramatic impact. The question now becomes, what is the solution? Well, fortunately, what we've come to realize, and the literature has shown, is that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is abbreviated as CBTI, is a proven solution to address sleep issues. What we've also learned in the literature is that CBTI can be administered in an online environment with results that are very similar, if not better in some cases, than when administered in person. So it has now become the treatment of choice when we're dealing with insomnia. The problem is access. So there are only about 300 specialists that identify themselves as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia specialists throughout the nation. Primary care physicians and sleep physicians are all overwhelmed as it is, and so getting access to this very important service is limited. That was the genesis of Project Z and Optisom over the last 2 to 3 years. The idea of being able to take the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, leverage technology so that they could be delivered to millions of individuals very cost effectively. Here you can see an example of the mobile user experience and the 3 key components that are part of the program. On the left is a 5-minute sleep health assessment. This allows us to determine not only what the prevalent sleep problems are, but also what are the precipitating factors that are driving that particular condition. That can allow us then to produce a personalized sleep health report. And then the final component is a customized cognitive behavioral therapy program that takes all that personalized information, presents the individual with modules which contain challenges. You can see here an example of a challenge that's worth 18 points. That point total will change based on an individual's responses to really address their particular needs. So if we look at the first component, we're not just talking about insomnia. We're talking about a host of sleep disorders that are prevalent in the workforce. So here you can see, in addition to insomnia, there's sleep deprivation, which can either be due to an illness, a sleep illness, or it can be voluntary. Also sleep apnea, jet lag, all types of sleep disorders. What we found, and what is so striking, is that when we look across our clients, 70% of the employees that are completing the survey are showing that they're suffering from 1 or more significant sleep health issues. Fully 47% have 2 or more, and a staggering 25% are reporting that they have 3 or more significant sleep health issues. So again, this was eye-opening, even to us. I mean, we knew that these issues were obviously very prevalent, but this data was eye-opening. The second component is the personalized sleep health plan. So here you see Shannon's sleep report, a little bit of a summary as to how she slept, and then some statistics and insights to help Shannon really become engaged and realize the impact that poor sleep is actually having on her life. The third component, here you see the dashboard. You can see at the top left the points total. That allows us to have a points economy that can integrate with other programs and incentive programs. And then here you can see a listing of modules. Each of these modules contains a series of challenges here, and each of the challenges is weighted differentially based on a particular individual's responses. So what have we found with regard to sleep times? Well, it turns out that a staggering 40% of the individuals are reporting that they're sleeping 6 hours or less. This is even worse than some of the statistics that we've seen previously reported by the CDC. For those individuals that completed the program, 82% achieved 2 or more hours of sleep per week, and 47% achieved 3.5 hours or more sleep per week. So we were very gratified by that. When you look at the user satisfaction, again, high levels with regard to improved sleep, improved health, as well as the feeling that the program was, in fact, really personalized. Some of the hard metrics, we looked at validated metrics with regard to insomnia, daytime sleepiness, and productivity limitation. So on the left-hand side, 92% success in resolving symptoms of insomnia, 76% reduction in excessive daytime sleepiness as determined by the validated Epworth Sleepiness Score, and a 43% reduction in productivity limitation as determined by the Work Limitations Questionnaire known as the WLQ from Deborah Lerner at Tufts in Boston. So when you look at that 43% reduction in productivity limitation, you can then factor that into her extensive database. And what we found was that for our clients, the return on their investment averaged between about 6.5 to 8.5-fold ROI. So again, very important information. And we presented some of that data at a recent HERO conference. Now I'd like to transition for a moment. When we talk with the Limeade team, we wanted to potentially give you some information about something that you can do right away that will help you with regard to improving your sleep. Now, this can be dangerous because tips given to large populations may not apply specifically to each individual in that population. So one of the things that we thought about was to talk about a phenomenon that is also associated with the phenomenon of sleep deprivation. And it is the thought that here in this rhetorical question, that I'll be fine. If I don't sleep enough during the week, I'll make it up on the weekend and I'll pay back my sleep debt. This is the concept of social jet lag. So what it basically boils down to is that during the week, your body is existing in one time zone. And then on your days off, you're shifting your body into a different time zone. Now, what we do know is that by sleeping in on the weekend or on your days off, you can in fact make up that extra time and you can retire that sleep debt, and so it will help you with regard to your level of alertness. The problem is that during the week prior to that, during let's say the 5 days, Monday to Friday, prior to that weekend, your body was existing in a milieu of inflammatory compounds and other compounds that really end up promoting diabetes, heart disease, obesity. And so that part of it, that environment that existed during the week can't be removed by simply sleeping an extra amount of time during the weekend. So social jet lag is a real problem. Here are some things that you can do to try to address it. The first is trying to regularize your sleep schedule. So I know it's difficult, but to the extent that your bedtime during the week and your bedtime on the weekends or days off is similar and your wake time is similar, that is very important to your body in terms of regularizing that schedule. The other thing that's important is light in the morning. So AM light is the most important stimulus that the brain uses to synchronize your body's clock. Now, here's an example of a piece of advice that applies to the vast majority of us. But let's say you were a shift worker and a night shift worker and you were coming home in the morning AM light may not be the best piece of advice because it will alert you and make it more difficult for you to potentially get rest when you get home. So again, this is why the information and the sleep hygiene and all of the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques need to be individualized, and they need to be given specifically to the right individuals. The next piece of advice, though, deals with stimulants. I've seen statistics that suggest that on the order of 90% of North Americans are consuming caffeine on a very regular basis. There is the existing thought that I don't need to sleep. I'll simply have more stimulants. I'll take a 5-hour energy or a Monster, or I'll have a double latte, and I don't need to actually get the sleep. But what I'm here to say today is that caffeine and stimulants are not a substitute for sleep. And in fact, there's some very interesting research that came out of the University of California that showed that during the course of the day, as we're working, our creativity tends to diminish. When you use caffeine to increase your alertness in the afternoon, you may become more alert, but your creativity doesn't improve. So once again, when we're looking at productivity, that decrease in creativity during the day has a dramatic impact on productivity. The only thing that the researchers found that improved the creativity in the afternoon was a nap, was taking a rest and actually recharging your brain. So stimulants are not a substitute for adequate sleep. So that brings me to taking a nap. And again, if you have a problem with chronic insomnia and have been battling insomnia for years, oftentimes taking a nap is not the best form of therapy because it tends to reduce your drive to sleep in the evening when you need it most. And so again, using a nap, it has to be administered at the right time to the right individuals. But if you're dealing with social jet lag and you have voluntarily restricted the amount of sleep that you were getting during the course of the week, the ability to take a nap can help at least restore some of the detrimental effects of the sleep deprivation during the course of the week. Now, we've been talking a lot about individuals and we've been talking a lot about the consequences. I want to put some numbers to what we've seen. So here's an example of a Fortune 100 consulting company that we worked with. And these are the types of prevalences that we saw with regard to a variety of sleep disorders. You can see 43% were having problems with insomnia. 19% of them were having problems with actually chronic insomnia. 40% were sleep deprived, and another 37% had risk factors that put them at high risk for obstructive sleep apnea. And then you can see a variety of other conditions as well. So this is not a, this is a very real phenomenon, and it has very real consequences in the workplace. I'll conclude now by just saying that as you want to deal with the health, the safety, and productivity of any group of individuals, sleep really is a foundational need. So if you have programs with regard to obesity or diabetes or other disease management programs, the ability to use a sleep program can really supercharge those efforts. Because as you've seen, if you're not getting adequate sleep, the likelihood that you're going to be successful on a diet, or the likelihood that you're going to be successful in managing your diabetes is dramatically impacted. So with that, I'll say again, thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much to Limeade, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Yeah, Dr. Munafo, this is Eric again. First off, appreciate not only your passion, but just the rich science and detail that you've put into this narrative. It's really, really clear to just about anybody who listens, and also backs up common sense, that sleep's important. And you know, from a Limeade perspective, we really could try and focus on whole person well-being, physical, emotional, financial, and work well-being, and moreover, sleep affects just about all of those. And one of the questions that has already popped in, I think is a really good one, where how can a company or a management team, how can they convince their organization to address kind of that whole person well-being, and more importantly, within the context of this dialogue, sleep health?
Well, Eric, again, that's a really an excellent question, and one that we see, very frequently. It's very difficult to address sleep in any organization if there really isn't buy-in from the management team. And I believe that the most important factor in terms of generating that buy-in is really helping them to understand the data that we've just talked about and the impact that has on their workforce. If they're really trying to optimize the performance of their workplace, if they want their employees to be engaged, and we know that they do, they've spent money on wellness programs and well-being. We know that Limeade is very focused on employee engagement and well-being. In order to really optimize those efforts, you really do need to have sleep as a component to allow those individuals to get the maximum benefit from all the other efforts that are being made to help them perform better and live better lives.
Excellent. Next question coming in from the questions in the chat. Are there recommendations for an amount or percentage of deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep?
Well, those things are not really under your direct control. So what we find is that as you age, your total sleep requirement diminishes until you get into, let's say, the 18 to early 20s. So your sleep when you are born and you're a newborn, you may be sleeping 16, 18, 20 hours a day. By the time you're in your early 20s, that stabilizes at about 7 to 9 hours per day. The amount of sleep that you're spending in REM is about 20% of that. And that number stays relatively consistent for the rest of your life. Now, when you're younger, in your 20s, the amount that you're spending in slow wave sleep is the most, that number will diminish. So in your early 20s, you may be spending 30 or 35% in slow wave sleep. And then that will slowly decline as we age. And slow wave sleep becomes harder and harder to come by as we enter our 50s, 60s, and 70s. So REM sleep and slow wave sleep have their own pattern that's sort of determined based on just how we are hardwired.
Excellent. Excellent. Another question for you. In some of the studies that you cited, particularly along your customer experience, how long did the benefits of the gain sleep persist?
Yes, so we're still gathering data with regard to how long these benefits persist, but the idea is that with the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, you're changing the way an individual thinks. And that leads to then changes in behavior. And what the literature would suggest is that the CBTI actually is far more effective at changing behavior long-term than, let's say, a sleeping pill. If you're taking a sleeping pill, it's treating the symptoms and it's only effective for as long as you're actually taking it. When you use CBTI and you use the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, by changing the way individuals think and behave, those patterns can last a lifetime.
Excellent. Another question, what's the difference between Project Z and Optisom?
So Optisom is the parent of, is a sort of the parent company, and Project Z is the sleep health platform that is Optisom's product.
And that's a SaaS platform that we have integrated in a thoughtful and purposeful way with the Limeade platform as part of our partnership.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Excellent. Another question, and this is open-ended, so I'm really excited to see how you're going to answer this one. Please share any insights that you have on the quality of sleep.
Yes, I think that's a great question, because as we find ourselves compromising the duration and the quantity of sleep, it really does put a premium on making sure that the quality of your sleep is the best it can be. So that gets to issues of, let's say, the environment in which you're sleeping. Is it cool, dark, and quiet? What about your lifestyle? Are you avoiding caffeine in the evenings? Are you exercising at appropriate times during the day? All of these types of pieces of advice can dramatically improve the quality of the sleep that you're actually achieving. And hopefully by maximizing the quality, you you may not have quite as much of a consequence if the quantity of sleep isn't as great as you'd like it to be.
Excellent, excellent. Another question that came in, you mentioned a lot in terms of personalization, and personalization is something that's really important through Limeade, about having a guided experience for the individual person and whatever they possibly could need at any given point in time. How do you personalize your program within Project Z's, and how do you make that really unique to the individual?
Yes, Eric, we've spent a lot of time on just that. And here I actually have something that I could show you. Here on the left-hand side, you can see some of the sleep conditions and the precipitating factors that we screen for on the left-hand side. And as an individual goes through the screener, we can now rank order those issues, so that we'll see issues like sleep hygiene, and we'll also find there are conditions. Let's say someone is having a shift work schedule. Those go into our clinical algorithms within Project Z. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the therapeutic modules that we've built to address those issues. And now we can stratify those therapeutic modules so that we're actually producing a personalized cognitive behavioral therapy program for this particular individual to address their particular needs.
Absolutely. And within a Limeade context, the presentation of somebody who maybe through their well-being assessment or through some other mechanism we find out is challenged with sleep, we can offer this up as well, and moreover have activities and challenges that link into the Project Z experience. A couple more questions have flowed in, so we'll keep rolling with it. Dr. Munafo, is CBTI Optisum product available to individuals or only through an employer program?
Right now, Project Z is only available through either an enterprise version through specific corporations or through our partners such as Limeade.
Excellent. Excellent. And there are other similar questions along the same vein there.
Okay.
Here's another one that just popped in. Have you associated an incentive program with the CBTI program points? And if so, what was the impact on sustained healthy sleep behaviors? Yes,
indeed. So, as we embarked on this journey 2 to 3 years ago, we really wanted to try to use the principles of incentivization and gamification to really drive engagement so that individuals would have the best chance of really getting the benefit of the CBTI. So as you saw earlier on the dashboard, we tally points. That allows us to have a point economy which can integrate with other, let's say, employee engagement platforms, particularly, let's say, Limeade's platform. And we also use principles of gamification. So we look at streaks and we look at the ability to generate trophies and things like that in order to try and get people engaged in Project Z. So what we have found is that the initial participation sometimes does vary relatively widely based on a particular, let's say, employer's desire to incentivize the program. What we have found is that it doesn't require very much in the way of incentives to get significant engagement. And once people are engaged, they tend to stick with the program, and they proceed to, a very high percentage of them proceed to a measurable outcome, which has really been very favorable.
Excellent. Well, with that, Dominic, we'll wrap up the Q&A components. Any parting shots or any final words for our audience here today?
Besides, thank you. I certainly want to say thank you again for all their attention. I think that the parting message would be that as important as this is, and as dire as some of the consequences I showed you are, there are really very defined ways that you can deal with this. And so there are great solutions available and great partners like Limeade that can provide these solutions to really help with these sleep issues. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, we thank you, and we thank especially all the attendees who joined us here today. This is obviously a really important topic, and I think all of us, both personally and professionally, aspire to be better, and more importantly, get high quality sleep. So thank you, everybody. This is going to conclude our session here today, and take care, and thanks.